There's just so much.
You're listening to a Mamamia podcast.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast is recorded on. Hello and welcome to Mamamia Out Loud. It's what women are actually talking about on Monday, the 6th of May. I'm Holly Wainwright.
I'm Leah Freedman.
And I'm Jessie Stevens.
And on the show today, why the whole world is arguing about the students' right to protest. Also, what do we do when a very famous person is breaking down in the palm of our hands again? And is the biggest show in the world right now just downright irresponsible? All the fallout from Baby Reindeer. But first,
In case you missed it, a new relationship theory says you're either a golden retriever or a black cat. There's a trend circulating on TikTok about the dynamics of romantic relationships in a heterosexual context, and apparently we all fit into the category of either a golden retriever or a black cat. Here is the explanation.
If you don't know, the golden retriever is the person that is doing the chasing in the relationship, and the black cat is the one getting chased. A lot of the times in healthy, successful relationships, the guy is the golden retriever chasing the black cat. The women that are the black cats in relationships that are the ones getting chased tend to have more successful and happier relationships when the guy is the golden retriever. And I can tell you from firsthand experience, when I've been the golden retriever, it doesn't work out. You just don't want to be a golden retriever girlfriend. I can promise you.
Doesn't this apply to all relationships?
I know.
There's like a pursuer and a pursued?
Well, you would think that, but the way that it has been framed on TikTok is very heteronormative and very much like there's a woman named Anna Christina. She's a mindset coach, and she says that the best dynamic in hetero relationship is one where the female is the mysterious femme fatale black cat and he is the loyal golden retriever, and it's the woman who needs to maintain the mystery, the independence. This pleases the golden retriever because he sits on the edge of his seat still intrigued by the black cat, and he's always interested and entertained because he feels like he never has a hold of her. I hate this series so much.
I liked this theory until I heard that explanation of it. Because I heard some of the girls at work talking about it, and they were talking about their friend groups and how there are black cats and golden retrievers within that, like the person who's always organising things and doing things and let's do this and let's do this. I kind of related because I think in life I'm a golden retriever, but in relationships I am a bit of a black cat. I'm a bit like, hair toss. When you frame it like this, it's just another way of saying the boring trope that men like to chase, which is not really a good dynamic to have out in the world.
No, it's not. And it also, when you really deconstruct it, it's about women not having any desire or any wants. You have to suppress all of that and look really chill and be somewhat unknowable, which is a very sexist kind of archaic trope, I think.
I went to a wedding once and the groom gave a speech and he said, in every relationship there's a giver and a taker, but in this relationship we're both givers. And afterwards they had their first dance. Every single couple that was at the wedding that was dancing was fighting about who was the giver and who was the taker in their relationship. Except me, it was fairly clear.
They were just two golden retrievers bouncing around the dance floor.
Exactly.
We've been camping here since last Tuesday.
I intend to remain here for as long as possible, in particular till our demands are met.
And are you ready for the police to move in and sweep you all up?
We're ready for anything.
And you're staying till such time as that happens?
We're going to stay.
Tent encampments on university grounds. Students being told to stay home for their own safety. Police using force to move protesters on, and millions of dollars being pulled in funding to some of the most prestigious colleges on the planet. These are the stories you've been hearing out of the US about university protests around the conflict in Gaza. And now you're seeing stories about protests at Australian universities too. So what's going on? Well, student protests over the war in the Middle East in America have been called the most significant of their kind since the Vietnam protests of the 60s and 70s. At colleges like New York City's Columbia, students have been camping out to demand an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, to demand their unis sever all academic ties with Israel, and to cut off research partnerships with arms manufacturers. And, of course, to pressure the US government to stop funding the Israeli government's assault on Gaza. To say these protests are big news and the topics of furious debate in the US would be understating it. Thousands of students have been arrested, and now, inspired by their US counterparts, Australian unis are also hosting protests. At the University of Sydney and Melbourne and at the Australian National University in Canberra, protest camps are growing, demanding an immediate ceasefire, disclosure of and divestment from all university activities that support Israel. For example, some universities receive funding from or have research partners with companies that build and sell weapons. And the protesters are asking that those relationships, if they involve Israel, are disclosed and discontinued. Australian unis at this point are saying that broadly they're supportive of the protests as long as they're peaceful. Now, uni students have always played a large part in protest movements, but as with everything about this conflict, these protests are intensely controversial. Why, Jessie Stevens?
There are so many competing truths here. First, I think students absolutely have the right to protest, and what is happening in Gaza, there are some numbers that suggest it's, 34,000 that have been killed, and that's men, women and children. And those who have fled to Rafah are sort of being pursued by Israel. And if you are a college student or you are a university student or you are a human being in the world watching this play out, nothing feels more urgent. And the stakes feel so high. And I think that there is a general sense of not knowing what to do, looking over there and going, we can't just sit here and watch that happen. I don't want to implicitly condone that. So I understand the protests. And in fact, when I was at Sydney Uni 12 years ago, there were protests about Palestine then. So it's something that the university has always been really passionate about, especially because of discussions around colonialism, and that's something that a lot of students, align themselves with.
Which is ironic in Australia.
Well, I think that's why.
Protesting colonialism in Australia.
I think that's why, though. I think that they're going, we have this history and this is something, there's, a big kind of Indigenous advocacy cohort. And look, this is all essential to a living, breathing democracy. And so I read really specifically about these because I know that everywhere it just becomes supercharged and myths begin to circulate. So what they're doing at Columbia University in the US is they've set up these tents. And there are, as with any university, as with any premises, as with any campus, rules about what constitutes a protest and what constitutes trespassing. And once you've set up tents and are sort of sitting outside buildings and you're not leaving.
So it's like occupying is different to
doing a protest that moves and a demonstration.
Right.
Whereas this is against the policy of the university. And so as far as I could tell, they were saying, we need you to move on, we need you to move on. There were warnings and warnings and warnings. And then they had to call in the police. I read the letter that the president of Columbia wrote. It seemed relatively reasonable to me. I don't want any force. I don't want to see any violence used. But then I'm reading that, whether it's destruction of property or it's fires being lit or whatever, like there are always lines.
I think on those campuses, not in Australia, but on those campuses, students were told to stay home because their safety couldn't be guaranteed. There was big disruptions to end-of-year exams, it's confusing here because it's mid-year, but that's when the academic year ends. So it was like graduations were having to be cancelled because of the disruption.
And the job of the college is to operate. Like it has to operate. And so even though the role of a protest is to be disruptive, and I understand that, and garner attention and to go, there are people being killed in Gaza and I am against that, I understand. But also the tension of a protest is kind of the point. So I understand that. But I also think that what makes this more complicated than any protest I've ever seen before is that what you are writing on the sign and what you think that means appears to be in conflict with how it is read from someone who might be Jewish. So, for example, if it says from the river to the sea, I heard someone saying at Columbia University, how is that violent? How is that anti-Semitic? And this is such a failure of communication because to someone who is Jewish, who has family in Israel, what that slogan means is the eradication of Israel and wiping out the population there. Feels incredibly aggressive. But you need to be able to protest the death of civilians without being called anti-Semitic. And that is where the tension continues to erupt. And you also can't make an entire protest about certain outliers who are saying things that are explicitly anti-Semitic. You know, there are parts where you can be sympathetic, and then there are parts where you sort of go, that's needlessly aggressive and racist.
I'm Jewish, for those outlouders who may not be aware, and I know Jewish people who are at university in Australia. And I should say I also protested about various things when I was at university. And, you know, I think protests can be great. I think it's important. You don't want to muffle people's ability to be activists and to protest and stand up for what they believe. I think where it crosses a line is when other students on campus are either harassed, abused, intimidated, made to feel unwelcome, ostracised. And I think that in a lot of these protests, the conflation of Israel with Judaism and the misunderstanding of what Zionism is, for example. You know, I know Jewish students who have tried to engage peacefully with the protesters at their universities, and as soon as they identified themselves as Jewish, they were filmed without their permission. They were called genociders, murderers, racists, all of these things. And the word Zionist was used as a slur and as a form of abuse. And not every Jewish person identifies as a Zionist, but what a Zionist is, certainly to me, and what I've always known it as, is someone who believes in the right of Israel to exist. And the belief in a two-state solution, which is that Palestine exists and Israel exists and somehow they've got to exist together. And the fact that just because you believe that Israel should exist doesn't mean that you approve of what Netanyahu's doing. Most Israelis that I know and most Jewish people have always hated Netanyahu. You know, he's not a leader who is popular. I don't know any Jewish person who's not deeply disturbed about the loss of life in Gaza. I honestly don't. And I think that it's interesting in all of these things, it also hasn't been spoken about the fact that there are still, I think, 130 hostages still being held. So when these protesters are asking for a ceasefire, also the release of the hostages. And in all the talks for ceasefires, Hamas has been rejecting continually the terms of the ceasefire.
So has Netanyahu.
As is their right.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing is about that, right, is the role of student protest is not to solve the conflict in the Middle East. It is an intensely complicated issue that has been going on for generations. It is entirely legitimate for those protesters to be protesting the war. It's interesting to me that some media are reporting them as pro-Palestinian protesters rather than anti-war protesters, right?
Well, they're not positioning themselves as anti-war.
Well,
they're positioning, when you hold a sign saying from the river to the sea,
but that's not
you're
everybody.
not anti-war.
But that's not everybody. I've seen signs at Australian universities that say Jewish and Palestinian students against the war.
Sure.
So I think we just have to be very careful of broad strokes, because the thing is that if you are feeling passionately that the governments of the world and the organisations of the world, the corporations of the world are not doing enough to bring this horrific conflict to an end. It's been months and months and months. And personally, I would rather see protests than just Instagram tiles. I genuinely would. I think that, of course, not violent protests. But I think that people are frustrated. People are feeling like nobody's listening, nothing's changing, all the usual avenues are not working. So they're protesting. And the thing is about all protests and the way they're reported in the media, whether they are about tax or immigration or war, is what you'll see the most of is the most inflammatory part of it. So you're going to see the people who are making the most fuss. You're going to see footage of clashes between opposing groups. You're going to see all of that stuff. It doesn't mean that all the young people who have decided that they want to stand in solidarity with universities in America or in Britain or anywhere else to protest this war are necessarily the extreme, you know, and have the answers to what should happen in the Middle East the day after a ceasefire. I don't think that you are banned from commenting on this if you don't then have all the answers after it or protesting about it. I entirely agree that the universities have an absolute duty of care to make sure that the universities stay safe for all students, 100%. But I think that student protest plays an important part, and we shouldn't knee-jerk think that those students all think one particular thing, are all necessarily anti-Semitic or all necessarily anti-Israel. They're just absolutely frustrated and despondent at the horror that we're seeing for months and months and months.
And I think the pressure on...
I think they are pretty aggressively anti-Israel, I have to say, Hol. And I'm not judging by what I've seen on media.
This moment, Mia.
Well, yeah, I understand it. And you can be anti-Israel. You can be anti-Israeli government and anti-Netanyahu. I'm certainly very anti-Netanyahu. And I agree with you. It can be challenging to agree with parts of what people believe in and parts not. But in terms of the atmosphere it's creating on campuses for Jewish students, are we comfortable with that? I mean, many people will probably say, yeah, fine, tough stuff. But I don't think you should have the right to protest and disrupt university life and target a group of students.
Oh, definitely not target.
Definitely not target.
But if you are a young person who is sitting in a history lecture learning about Hiroshima, or whether it's like some atrocities that have occurred in the 20th century.
Or the Holocaust.
Yeah, exactly right. Where populations have been killed, and history looks back on these moments and goes, what were we all doing? If you're a young person who is mobilized by that and wants to stand there and say, I don't think that civilians should be killed as collateral damage, then what's difficult at this moment is where do I stand, who do I stand next to? Because the nuance that you just described cannot be printed on a sign and is not very good in a chant. So I feel as though it's an absolute breakdown of communication, and protests aren't really about communication with the other side, are they?
No, they're about polarization, right?
Well,
they're about a demonstration of solidarity.
Yeah, they are. That's what they're about. I've been to plenty of protests in my time where I don't agree with everything that is being said. You know, I've been to lots of rallies where every organisation that stands up there and speaks does not represent me, but it's a cause that I feel passionately enough about that I got out of bed and went and stood in the park. You know what I mean? And I entirely agree with you, Mira. I really hope that what I just said about how I do believe passionately in their right to protest, I do not believe passionately in anybody's right to attack a group. But the question of whether or not you're attacking a group, you're attacking every Jewish student at the uni by holding up an anti-Israel sign, I would say you're not.
Mamamia out loud.
Some members of the Free Britney movement are questioning whether they were wrong to fight for the 42-year-old star to be released from her conservatorship 3 years ago after a disturbing incident at the Chateau Marmont Hotel in LA over the weekend. Photographs appeared of Britney half naked, barefoot, dishevelled, and holding a pillow and wrapped in a blanket, being escorted from the hotel after police and paramedics were called. She posted a confusing message on Instagram the next day showing her badly swollen ankle, and here's what she said.
Okay, guys, so you know, I really twisted my ankle last night like an idiot just to show proof. Don't look at my feet. I need a manicure. It's so bad. Fucking idiot here tries to do a leap in the living room at the chateau, and I fell. Embarrassed myself. And that's it. Paramedics came to my door illegally, of course, caused this huge scene, which was so unnecessary, and all I needed was ice. It is actually pretty bad.
She went on to say that her mother was behind it. It was a pretty confused message. Now, a couple of things happened last week that some are saying may have contributed to her breakdown. The first is that she reportedly was ordered to pay her estranged father $2 million in legal costs after he had already paid himself $6 million as head of her conservatorship. And the other thing that happened on the actual day of this incident is that her divorce from Sam Asghari, her husband, was finalised. So, look, after the release of her memoir, The Woman in Me, it was only a year ago, there were some hopes that it marked a new chapter for Britney and that she was finally taking control of her story and her life. But the 3 years since the conservatorship ended, are not pointing in that direction, let's be honest. I mean, if we recap where she's at, she's got no relationship with her two sons, who are now 17 and 18. She's estranged from her parents and her younger sister. She seems to have no real friends in her life, apart from a few of the celebrities who rocked up at her wedding but haven't been seen since, including Madonna, Selena Gomez, Paris Hilton. No shade on them, but they don't seem to have appeared in her life before or since. She spends free time, of which she seems to have quite a lot, on social media, dancing half naked and twirling knives. And as she did on Thursday night, sort of issuing these nonsensical denials and declarations. There was a piece by Maureen Callahan over the weekend who says she was part of the Free Britney movement or a supporter of it. And she wrote, "It is abundantly clear that those who argued to free Britney, myself included, were very wrong. But after her trial became an international cause célèbre, after her tearful testimony about her father controlling every aspect of her life down to her birth control, well, what judge would ever sign off on reinstating a conservatorship for Britney now?" Holly, it's all a little bit familiar, isn't it? Except we know a lot more and the answer seems to be a lot less clear as to what happens from here.
100%. It feels like 2007 all over again. And that's the year that infamously Britney had what's always termed her breakdown, shaved her head. And, you know, the way that we've viewed history since then is that she was pretty much driven to the edge of that crisis by very intense paparazzi scrutiny, dysfunctional relationships with her family, possible drug abuse, mental illness, all of the things, right? Marriage breakdown, custody drama.
There was a lot going on.
And now, like, looking at the pictures of her outside the chateau, and I shouldn't admit to looking at them because I'd promise I clicked off them very quickly once I saw what they were. But it felt like 2007, me working in gossip mags in the meetings in the morning, seeing these chaotic pictures of Britney Spears every day. Yeah. You know, there are fights with the family, ambulances called to hotels, questionable boyfriend. She's alleged to be involved now with someone who was once her housekeeper, and he seems to be
another grifter.
Yeah, another grifter. The big thing that's changed since then, though, is that now Britney has a mouthpiece of her own. She has her Instagram account. It's very often she uses it to push back on these kind of stories. But the truth of it is, even though I hate the idea of sort of concern trolling people for what they post on social, there's no getting away from the fact that it's very...
She's not thriving.
She's not, and I'm going to read you a tiny bit of one of her recent
very mentally unwell. Let's just call it for what it is.
And I don't read this like for her to be mocked, but just to give a taste for people who are not. She's actually changed her name on Instagram to, she's called Zila now, by the way. Zila Maria River Red is what she's called. And one of her recent posts where she writes on notes apps and then she posts all the screens. And she was talking about a holiday that she was on recently. And she was saying, I know lots of people make fun of me because I use a ring light, but I like it, so I bought 3 new bathing suits for this trip. My favourite part of the trip was being naked in the water. The boat was exciting, except I wanted to drive it and they wouldn't let me. They used to let me. I don't know why they don't now. Since I changed my name to Zila, I'm actually having a hard time understanding English. Like, this is the kind of stuff that she posts over and over again. And it's just very hard to not concern troll Britney Spears at this point. As Maureen Callahan said, nobody's wishing for a new conservatorship for Britney because, to be honest, who on earth in her life would you trust to be in charge? There were other stories last week about her fortune and how it's grown. And so she's got all this money, she's got all this freedom, but she seems deeply at risk.
It's a lot like 2007, and then it's also totally different to 2007 because back then the only perspective we had was that of the people behind the cameras, right? The paparazzi pictures that were published. We didn't have her voice and she didn't have a direct way to communicate with us. And I think we imagined that it would be better if she did. And I don't think it is in some ways. I mean, I saw those images that were taken of her at the Chateau Marmont. I thought, I hate that these exist. I've said that before. I know I'm being very idealistic to think that they wouldn't. But at what point does this become none of our business? Like, what does it have to do with the public interest, whether Britney Spears has pants on or not?
I think you can say this is in the public interest. I mean, you can't undo celebrity. You can't, put fame back in a bottle. So when there's someone as world famous as she is, who is in public behaving in a way that is unusual, if it's not the paparazzi, it's going to be a bystander. Like she will always.
That's interesting though, Mia, because I agree with you generally when you say you can't put fame back in a bottle. But what's interesting about Britney at the moment, different when her book was out, although she seemed to actually have very little to do with that, she's not actually trying to sell us anything right now. So you know how usually the justification for the public interest is like, well, if she wants to maintain, and I'm sort of taking a provocative stance here. If she wants to maintain several million Instagram followers so that we're all primed and ready for her new album, new book, new movie, whatever, then that's often our justification for peaking, you know what I mean, for being quite voyeuristic and looking. But for the longest time, watching Britney Spears isn't benefiting Britney Spears.
But the conversations now are very different to the ones then. And I think that, and this is what's tricky, right? Because she keeps saying, I'm fine. It's fake news. I'm fine. It was my ankle. It was my mother. This is my name now. Like if someone says they're fine and wants to spend their money in whatever way they want to spend it.
And wants to broadcast to us, because that's the thing. It is the public Instagram profile and it is a published book. So the interest has been cultivated by those two things.
I'm always interested because I follow her, and when I see posts that she's made and then I see people that I know liking them, I'm like, what is your like signifying in this instance? Is it signifying you go girl, I support you? Or is it signifying
I hope you're okay?
I hope you're okay. And again, the like is a fairly blunt instrument in what it tells us. But I think that a lot of people who were very much in favour of the conservatorship being undone are going, well, this wasn't what I had hoped for.
Yeah.
Do I want the conservatorship back? No. But what happens now? And I think that Maureen Callahan's point is that it's true. Conservatorship won't be reinstated. So if she does continue to be out in public, and really what she's damaging is her brand. I mean, is her life in danger? That's unclear. Her brand is obviously, but has been for a really long time. Who owns that anyway? She does.
And maybe conservatorships, regardless, are not the answer. They don't feel right. And there was obviously some genuine exploitation that was happening with the conservatorship. But I think there was some naivety that
that's a good
trajectory of mental illness is that she was unwell and now she's well and she deserves, I don't know, everyone deserves full freedom, but you know what I mean. And that's actually not how mental illness goes.
People like to believe that the conservatorship was the problem. And I think it was a part of a problem, but there are 10 other problems that we can only guess about, whether it's mental health, addiction.
Is the compassionate thing to do to unfollow Britney Spears and look away?
I think so. I have found this with Amanda Bynes. So she's been popping up on my TikTok, and she has a different name on TikTok, and same thing. She's not in a movie. She's not trying to sell me anything. She did a podcast that she was promoting for a minute, and now I think she's studying to be like a nail artist.
I think it's interesting what you guys are saying. It's not that we're only interested in people. That's not how the relation or the parasocial relationship or the fame relationship works. It's not that we go, oh, this person's promoting a movie, therefore we're interested in them, and then we will stop being interested in them until they're promoting their next thing.
No, you can't turn it off, as you say.
You can't turn our interest off.
But if someone is clearly in crisis, and again, you know, the parasocial relationship here of a doctor, of me diagnosing Britney with something.
Clearly in crisis.
Clearly in crisis. Is the compassionate thing to do to go, we won't use this as our entertainment as we're scrolling Insta or TikTok every morning and looking also at dogs and recipes and pretty people in bikinis. Maybe Britney, you know, her latest drama, for want of a better word, is not our entertainment.
So you keep scrolling and you'll see Justin Bieber crying on Instagram as well. It's unclear what that's about. Is it unclear?
Yeah, it is.
He says he's fine too.
Yeah, but child stars are not okay.
Yeah, so I don't know.
The issue is that even with people mocked the 2007
I don't know if shaming us
moment.
for our interest in this is...
But
what's the word I'm looking for?
We're part of the machine. We're part of the
Helpful.
machine because in 2007, the mocking of that image of Britney Spears was everywhere and it was horrifying and we look back and we're ashamed, right? But now I'm going through and I'm seeing people imitating Britney Spears all the time. And now we just know that they're imitating someone.
Imitating Britney Spears
like
all the
doing
time?
like the dancing videos, someone will just mimic as comedy. And it's all over TikTok. So our entertainment is then like, are we as a culture now just making fun of people who are mentally ill and they're in on it? Like, I'm not sure if this is where we've got to. And yeah, it's exactly the same with Amanda Bynes. And I'm going, this is just a woman trying to live her life. She's spoken about addiction issues and mental health issues. She's not trying to sell me anything. I just want to leave her alone and let her get on with it.
Outlouders, if you want to listen to us every day of the week, and why wouldn't you, you can get access to exclusive segments on Tuesdays and Thursdays by becoming a Mamamia subscriber. Follow the link in the show notes to subscribe, and a big thank you to all our current subscribers.
Last month, Netflix released its first viral hit of 2024, the black comedy drama thriller Baby Reindeer. The show was written and created by Richard Gadd, who plays a fictionalised version of himself named Donnie Dunn. If you haven't watched it yet, Baby Reindeer was based on a one-man show performed by Gadd about his experience with a female stalker and also sexual abuse perpetrated by a man within the industry. We did a subscriber episode on Baby Reindeer where we sort of broke it down, provided an analysis, talked about the true story elements. Because while the names are fictionalised, we are told straight away that this is a true story. It even says so on the promotional poster. Not based on, it is a true story.
I found that bizarre.
Yeah, you don't say that a lot.
Because you could easily say based on and fictionalise.
They may come to regret that.
So it took about 45 seconds from the series release for the audience to identify, and in some cases misidentify, who Gadd was talking about. Martha, who is the stalker in the show, was quickly identified by internet sleuths. People just cross-reference the clues in the show with publicly available information on real-life stalking cases. She has now come forward and said she's receiving death threats and she is being stalked by Gadd's supporters and has threatened to sue. Then there's the man who Gadd represents as sexually abusing him. In the show, his name is Darian. The actor who plays Darian bears a striking resemblance to a producer Gadd once worked with, who has had to clarify that he is not the abuser. But because of the harassment, he has stepped down from his leadership role in the theatre industry. Neither the real Martha nor the real Darian has been charged or convicted of any offence relating to the matters covered in Baby Reindeer, and that means that they are entitled to the presumption of innocence and the recourse of defamation proceedings.
That's interesting because in the spoiler alerts for Baby Reindeer, obviously in this segment, but in the TV series, she was tried, found guilty and sent to jail, wasn't she?
She was.
So that's
but
not
true.
In
real life.
So how can you say this is a true story and parts of it are not true? And he has said in interviews, clearly for plausible deniability, I've changed some details. Please don't go looking for these people. The naivety of that I found breathtaking. And it's like he changed details to make these people look worse, but not to obscure their identity in terms of Martha.
So, I mean, whose job is that? Because is it the job of Netflix to know and engage in the era we live in? This is not 1990. This is 2024. Yeah. We all could have seen, surely, what was going to happen. Holly, is this Gadd who should have been more careful? Or is this a real failure of Netflix? Or does he just have the right to do this?
It's really such a shame, right, I think, what's happened in the past 2 weeks. I was late to Baby Reindeer, so Outlouders, if you were not an early adopter, it's okay. I've only just watched it. And then I listened to your brilliant Subs-ep, which was very satisfying. But what's happened since then is almost bigger than the show now. And the show is brilliant. You know, as you rightly say, so original, so thought-provoking,
nuanced,
so clever, so stylish, all that stuff. Just the best thing I've watched in forever. And now you feel like this man who created it, his life is about to be ruined because the lawsuits are going to come hard. And I've read some commentary in relation to what you've said, Jessie. I mean, I'm not an expert in this field, but I've heard people who are say that a traditional production company, when dealing with something that is based on a true story like this, they have a big compliance department crammed with lawyers, and they would have gone hard on making sure there was no way that you could have identified these people. The complication is The show is based on 2 live shows of Gad's that are already out in the world and were massive hits, right? So he did a stand-up show at the Edinburgh Festival based on the stalking story, and he did a different one based on the abuse story. Both of them were very successful. He is a big deal in the comedy world in Britain already.
So that's interesting. Even though in the Baby Reindeer he made himself out as a failed comic, he wasn't actually
He was never
failed.
a
He wasn't
comic.
a failed comic. Well, he may have been when all
I
this
read
began.
his Wikipedia profile because I wanted to know how long he failed for. He did not fail.
No. So
Interesting.
It's much of what is fictionalized here is also partly his life, right?
Do you think that makes him look better or worse, that he made it seem like he was this failed comic?
I think narratively, I
don't
totally
think it matters.
understand the way that it
Yeah.
was plotted. I think
Right.
he made some really good.
I'm just wondering if it changes
Yes.
the depiction of the power dynamic between him and his stalker and him and Darian.
He wasn't stalked because he was famous. Like, when I say famous, I don't mean like he would have been recognised in the street. I mean, like, if you were in the comedy
I
world, you were
understand.
like, oh, that Richard Gadd, his edgy comedy, it's great. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But he became a big deal because of these shows, because they were big hits, right? And then he got his Netflix deal. Now, a lot of the commentary I've heard is that Netflix did not expect this show to be as big as it's gotten because it didn't get a lot of pre-promotion in the way that, you know, like a Game of Thrones or the new Anne Hathaway rom-com or whatever has. It was just quietly dropped and it went legitimately viral. And some of the commentary I've read from experts said that if this was big traditional media company, all those lawyers in the compliance departments would have worked like crazy on this. And
Like if it was the BBC or a big Hollywood studio.
Even the ABC, like in Australia,
Of
has
course.
incredible compliance and incredible legal teams that would make sure that they're not going to get
the
sued.
insinuation there is that the production companies that produced this and then Netflix as its platform were a bit fast and loose and kind of allowed Gadd and the other producers to kind of be a bit fast and loose with that, because when it comes to his assertion that Martha was disguised beyond recognition, she's been tracked down and the Daily Mail have found her and the Daily Mail went and interviewed her. They even made her do a photo shoot sitting on a bus stop, just like in the show, which they, at the 11th hour, decided not to publish. My God. Now the journalist who wrote that profile says he is now being harassed and stalked by her and he's getting messages from her all the time. The story goes on and on and on, right? But she was easy to find. She is Scottish in real life, just like in the show. She claimed to be a lawyer and did a law degree, just like in the show. She lives in a London council flat. She is a middle-aged woman who is a little plus size. All those things that are represented in the show are true. And because Netflix, and you talked about this on your Subsep, because Netflix, even as part of their promo, went out to say that every message shown in the show is a real message, you can then search all that stuff and it didn't take anyone very long. So
What did he think was going to happen?
So I kind of feel like it must be a very bittersweet moment for Richard Gadd and all his associated producers. He has the biggest TV show in the world right now and his genius is on full display because it's extraordinary. But he is probably going to get sued to hell.
I wonder if he'll get sued or if Netflix will be sued.
Both.
Because I feel like this is on Netflix. It's Richard Gadd's job. He did the one-man show and told his story and Netflix says we want to make a show out of
And they
this.
think just on that, Jessie, that because the nature of a live show, smaller impacts, different legal boundaries.
Yeah, but the difference with a one-man show is that you didn't cast anyone.
Yeah.
So this was a really interesting decision because, as we know, Gadd wouldn't have been the sole person to cast. So whose responsibility is it to sit in the room and go, hey, let's be really careful here? I mean, I've sat in writers' rooms where we've come up with storylines and someone's pitched something and I've gone, that's the truth. So we'll have to change that. Or don't use that name.
Yeah.
That's the real name.
Yeah, right.
So, and I guess that comes from working on the internet for a really long time. But for him, I feel like he had a story to tell and then the production company comes in and whether it's legals or compliance, it was their responsibility. They're a multi-million-dollar corporation who should know better.
We didn't need any of that. And we've had this exact experience when we were in the writer's room and putting together Strife, right, which was based on my memoir. The language is very well known in creative circles about the technical difference between based on, inspired by.
Yeah.
And this is a true story, is just like almost a fictionalized documentary. Like that's the most connected that you can have a piece of fiction be to real life events.
But even that term, what that does for publicity, I lean in more, right?
Yeah.
Like when it says based on, like I remember with Unorthodox, it said based on, and then I got obsessed with the differences and blah, blah, blah. Like the appeal of that, and Netflix is known for kind of heralding the true story. And this is what everyone said. They watched Baby Reindeer, brilliant show. But the thing that they were saying was, I cannot believe that happened.
Yeah.
That's the bit that blows people's
minds. And it was easier for us in Strife because it was sort of an ensemble, but it was also challenging because people were like, oh, that character is based on you. And, you know, I'd read it and I'd go, oh, but what if someone thinks that I really said that? Or what if someone thinks that that person's, what we wanted to avoid was someone going, oh, that's that person and that's that person. So we worked really, really hard to make characters hybrid. They're much harder in this because you've literally got one stalker, one abuser, one protagonist. And then I'm also interested to know about the character of Terry, who was his girlfriend for a while. I saw an interview with him and he looked shocked.
Yeah, I think this has surprised everybody.
Yeah, and he looked panicked actually,
and
which was about like, don't look up these people, please.
And in terms of what did he expect to happen, he didn't expect this to be this big.
No, and so what's interesting is he's been a little bit mocked because he's kind of been like, obviously he did interviews in the lead up, but if you go and look at his socials and everything now, he's been lying pretty low. But he released a story saying, please everybody stop sleuthing. And I want to get to that right because in the same way that I've just wagged my fingers at all of us for following Britney Spears while she's having a breakdown. There's a case for wagging our fingers at ourselves in that we cannot just let pieces of art stand anymore, right? Like you watch the show, as I said, blew me away. I loved it. I binged it. I never do that, all those things. And the fact that we can't just go, that was brilliant, we just don't live in that world anymore, right? But then we pick things to death. And I wonder if that is human nature? Is that internet culture? Is that our fault?
It's internet culture because
all the information is there at our fingertips.
Everyone watched Baby Reindeer from a really cynical perspective. And then I as a publication...
But did they not? But did they watch it from a cynical perspective? Did they watch it because they bloody loved it and then they wanted to kind of extend it?
I'm not blaming it on the people. I'm blaming it on digital media. Right. So I think that what happens is Baby Reindeer trends. I used to edit the weekends, right? And if I was the editor on Saturday and Sunday and I saw baby reindeers everywhere, I go, okay, I have to write 10 articles with baby reindeer something in the search engine optimization because that's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I need to have stories to publish. So I go baby reindeer blah, baby reindeer blah. I kind of feed the beast until I get more and more information and the cycle continues and everyone's clicking and then...
It's a bit chicken and egg because the media are reflecting what everybody's already looking for, right? That's the point of SEO. Once people are searching, you want them to come to your story. But the point is that we're living in this age where all this information is accessible to us. Say this was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, even if it had said based on a true story, you would watch it and go, oh, wow, that's amazing. Oh, I wonder if that was real. And then you would have moved on, you would have gotten on with your life. Now, literally as the credits are rolling, even probably in episode 1, which is what I did, we've all got our phones.
Did you actually Google it? Because I didn't.
Of course I
At
did.
the end, I was like, I don't think it's the point. I don't think the real Martha's the point. I don't think the real Darian is the point. I sat there for a minute. There was a line about comedians and I sat there for a minute and I went, I wonder if it's a really famous producer who that... I wondered it and I did not Google. I did not have any interest because I thought the story
But this
was
is
more
a
than all
true
that.
story was almost baiting us to do that.
Yeah, I think that's a fair argument. Because I was loving it so much, I did go and Google. Like, I always like to read reviews after I've watched something.
Same.
And be validated. And so I did want to read about it and I wanted to read about Gad. But I didn't necessarily want to go and see a real picture of Martha or whatever. What it was interesting on the podcast I was listening to where Richard Osman, who's a very big British TV person, was saying that everybody knows who that abuser is. Like in that world, because the comedy world is small, right? Everybody knows who he is. And because Gad had been doing the show for a long time, everybody knew. He said what's really strange was the choice to cast this actor who looked very much like the other producer, as you said in your intro, Jessie, who Gad had worked with as well. Like, what a weird decision. Why wouldn't you cast someone who looked absolutely nothing like either of these people?
I've done that in fiction where I've done something really weird. Like I've written a character and then I've named them and someone have said, oh, you named them that because of blah. And I'm like, oh, that
I
was
did that with
semi-unconscious.
Luca.
Yeah.
Like when,
And then in I Give My Marriage a Year, I called a character Luca and you guys were like, what were you thinking? And I was like, I don't know. But then once I'd done it, I couldn't change it somehow. It's brilliant.
Exactly.
I don't know. It's such a brilliant piece of art. I think it's a real shame if it ruins his life, I have to say.
Yeah. If you are obsessed with Baby Reindeer and need to debrief, because this was one that you really needed to talk to people afterwards. I watched it with Jessie and my family, including my teenage son, who has never regretted anything more since the time he watched Saltburn with us, which we've also recapped. We've done a subs episode recapping all our thoughts about Baby Reindeer, the actual show. We'll put a link to that in the show notes.
Melbourne Out Louders, we are there on Thursday.
Do you know how many tickets are left? 95.
We've got to move them. Melbourne Out Louders, we want to see you there. We are heading to the Palais for Mamamia Out Loud Live, presented by Nivea Cellular. We had so much fun.
I should put that in context. We've already sold 2,000 in Melbourne because you might think, oh, well, is that 95 out of 200? Which would be sad. But no, just in case you're feeling really sorry for us.
It's going to be a big night. Can we tell the Melbourne Out Loud as anything else? Or like, it's 2 parts. There's an interval.
There are costume changes.
There's a surprise.
The big talk, of course, has been me defacing my beautiful Joey, the label.
Yeah.
Can I just say out loud, as you can see on Mamamia Out Loud Instagram, that when we were backstage, a couple of minutes before we went on, I decided I needed to alter my dress. So someone found me some scissors. Lucy Ormond, poor thing, had to find me some scissors, and I went for it. And I posted what happened, and I was quite pleased with the result. Some people were not happy. They weren't happy.
No, I think it's offensive to the garment. I had
If
someone
you know
say,
Mia, as we do, Jessie, is that Mia needs to do something chaotic just before she goes on. So that was your chaotic thing.
Oh my gosh, that's so true, Hol. Aren't you glad that it didn't involve you two this time? I know. So who knows what I'll do before Melbourne? Maybe I'll turn a pair of pants into shorts. Who can say?
You deserve a night out with us on Thursday. Come see us at the Palais in Melbourne. Head to outloudlive.com.au. We cannot wait to see you there.
Thank you for listening to Australia's #1 news and pop culture show. This episode was produced by Tahli Blackman with audio production from Leah Porges, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Bye.
Bye.
Shout out to any Mamamia subscribers listening. If you love the show and want to support us as well, subscribing to Mamamia is the very best way to do so. There is a link in the episode description.